Hey everybody, it's Mrs. C. I am coming to you with a video on graphing parabolas level 4 on Delta Math. And after having done a couple of these problems, I think I definitely see the issue you guys might be having with them. So hopefully I can shed a little light. I don't know. These are tricky, not in the math part tricky, but in the actual how to record your answer on the web. That is really the tricky part, not getting the math right. So if we look at a problem like this, we have the y equals, we're being asked to plot the given parabola on the axes, plot the roots and the vertex and two other points. The plotting is the tricky part, and so getting the answers hopefully isn't the tricky part. So I'd like to go through that first to make sure you know how to get the answers, and then we'll talk about how to actually plot our answers. And then even if we can't plot them right, can we at least see that we got them right and then we weren't maybe precise enough when we did our plotting? And so let's just get started. So first of all, we want to find the axes. We're going to be using the quadratic formula. That's really what I want you practicing. So let me shrink that down just a little bit. And we're going to go ahead and put our A, B, and C values. Before I do my ABC values, just because we're working with the quadratic formula, I do like to work with smaller numbers. So if you notice, these are all evenly divisible by 2. So to get my values, I'm just going to shrink my A, B, and C values down a little bit. So my A value would be equal to 1. My B value would be equal to a negative, 13. And my C value is going to be equal to a negative 90. That's going to make my math a little bit easier since I'm doing this old school with the quadratic formula. So my quadratic formula is x equals negative b plus minus square root of b squared minus 4ac over 2a. Now just going to put those values in, change my color. My b value is a negative 13. My ac is going to be 1 times negative 90. That's a negative 90. And my a is a 1. So when I clean that up, I wind up with x equals a negative 13. That's positive 13 plus minus the square root of whatever. What is negative 13 squared is 169. And that's going to be plus 360 all over 2. Okay, so let's just use our calculator to get that square root. So we have the 169 plus the 360. That's going to give me x equals 13 plus minus the square root of 529 over 2. So the square root of 529 is 23. I've noticed that these are all perfect squares at least. At least that, right? We'll take what we can get. 13 plus minus 23 over 2. And we're just going to get our two different x values. So we'll do the 13. What do we like to do? The plus first. We'll do the 13 plus 23. Divide that by 2. And we get 18. Hopefully that's right. 18 is one answer. And then I'm going to do my 13 minus 23 divided by 2. And that's negative 5. Well, that's about as nice of answers as I've gotten in a long time. So I hardly even believe it. So I've got them on backwards, right? Negative 5 on this side, 18 on this side. We're going to be plotting those as our x-axis values. And when I say we're going to try to plot them, because what we have to do here, guys, is we have to set our scale so that we can fit a negative 5 and an 18. The problem is none of these have been multiples of each other. So either I set my scale to be in multiples of 5, or I set my scales to be maybe multiples of 9, so that I can actually plot them on whole intervals. Well, you can't. You're not going to be able to come up with one that's going to be able to be both. And so you got to either pick. And that's where my problem has been, because then you have to graph a fraction and you have no idea exactly where to graph it. So that's been the issue. So the important thing is that we've got this right. We know our x values are our zeros of the function. X equals a -5 and an 18. And so we should be plotting those. Record that down, because when it tells you you're wrong and it gives you your answers, you want to see if you actually had your values correct. And so we're going to move from there on to the next thing, which it's asking us to plot the vertex. So in order to plot the vertex, I have to actually use the vertex formula. And my vertex formula, guys, I don't need to work any harder than I'm already working, right? I feel like I'm really working hard here. This is my vertex formula. It's the -b/2a, which I've already done. So my vertex x value, because it's x equals, right, is 13, not the plus minus, it's just 13/2, which 13/2 is 6.5, right? So my x value is 6.5, and now I need to get my y value. So I plug in my x value into my original, right there, into my original, and I will find the vertex. Now, don't plug the vertex into the simplified. Remember when I did my GCF? I did that so that my quadratic formula would be smaller numbers so that I could actually solve it. When I'm actually now trying to find the vertex and the axis of symmetry, I need to use the original. And if you get confused with that, then don't simplify. Just use the bigger numbers in the quadratic formula. Don't make them smaller, because you definitely will get a different vertex and it will be off. Your zeros will always be right, because that's a solution. The others are just the behavior or the look of the graph. And whether this graph is wide or skinny, it's going to affect the look of the graph. And so I'm going to plug in my 6.5 to the original. So when I plug 6.5 into 2x squared minus 26x minus 180, I'm going to get my y value. So let me go off to the side and do that in my calculator real quick. So I got -264.5. -264.5. And that is where I'm going to graph my vertex. This is vertex. And then again, that's where it becomes a little tricky, is in graphing these, you have to set your scale factors. And so let me go off to Delta Math. I'll be back after I have thought and contemplated my scale factors for a moment. Okay, so here it is, guys. I feel like I checked the work. I feel like definitely doable. You have to, it's a process of not guess and check, but with these, where's my pen? Let me see. When you're selecting your axes, your values here, your scales, you need to just try. It's almost a trial and error. So I went, in this case, I set my axes, my x's by 5s, and I believe the others were by 20s, because my values that I was going to try and plot was 5 and 18, so -5 and 18. So I figured I'd be able to get pretty close. My y-axis, after I did my vertex, which is right up here, now you have to look at 6.5 or 6 and 264. And so I decided to go by 50s, or excuse me, by, what is it? I'm trying to see, by 20s, because I thought by 20s it would give me the kind of the shortest distance between my intervals, where I feel like I could get close enough. But there's no right or wrong way of setting up your intervals. Once you set up your intervals or your scale factors, what you're looking for to know whether you should submit your answer is that this line that it draws after you've put in that last value, it should go through all of your points. If it doesn't go through all of your points, you want to go back and you want to just kind of finesse your points a little bit so that it actually goes through them, because it's most likely it's not a math issue for you. It's just the plotting of these points when they're fractional. They don't fall on a whole, we call it a lattice point or a cross. So this is one where you got to do your best. You just have to play around with those intervals a little bit till that thing goes through. But the math, or the graph, the line goes through your points. The graph itself, right here, once it gives you your right or wrong, it will actually tell you your math. So this is where I was saying, please make sure you check. Did I get my vertex right? Did I get my two roots correct? Because that's where you'll know whether you're right or wrong. Now, I know you're saying to yourself, okay, but how do you know I'm right, Mrs. C, when you're looking at my work? Well, I don't. I can't tell if this check or this X was because you just did it real fast and had everything wrong, or just because your plot was off a little bit. So that's why I didn't ask you to do too many of them. I think I only asked you to do 5 of them. And if I did ask you to do more than 5, I'm going to go back and fix that. So you only have to do 5. And put in a decent amount of time. It does show me your time effort as well. So not the easiest thing we do. Next time I stream live, I'm hoping I'm going to hear some specific questions that we can talk about, you know, how do we do it? And otherwise, one thing I am going to open this up to is if you have a graphing calculator, go ahead and use it for this. Use all the bells and whistles that we've learned on the graphing calculator, because I think you're going to need it to kind of shortcut. There are graphing calculators available online as well, but it's, of course, it's always helpful to have one in your hand. So we'll be talking about this again. Good luck. I know you know how to do the math. It's the graphing that is definitely a little bit of a learning curve, but I know you can take care of it. I know you can do this. And I'll see you on the flip side.